we are starting Parakeh, chapter 5 of Tanya. Chapter 5, as we mentioned last class, is a direct continuation from the end of chapter 4. What was happening at the end of chapter 4? Well, we were answering the question, is God really in the Torah I'm studying? I mean, they don't talk about oxen or stolen items or wool or money in God's will and wisdom. I mean, right? That's all part of physical planet Earth stuff. So is God really, really within this Torah? Or is it a ray, glow, shine, light from his energy? And we said, no, it's really God. There's layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. But under all those layers, it's God himself. It's his will and wisdom. And the Rebbe, to explain this in a very concrete way that makes sense to our brains, compared it to someone hugging a king. Why do you compare it to someone hugging a king? Well, seemingly because kings wear many robes. So if you're, for some reason, you have the privilege of hugging the queen and she's wearing all these robes, you're not feeling her body, you're feeling the robes, which does make a difference. You don't say, I hug the robes of Queen Elizabeth. You hug the queen. And they're right. You're hugging the king's hugging you. Within all we learn, the king is there. Yes, there are robes and robes and robes. But why am I studying this? Why am I hugging? I'm hugging robes? I'm hugging the person in the robes. My mind is full of oxen and wool and linen and money. My mind is full of God that's within that. So the vision the Rebbe gave us was this double embrace of us hugging and being hugged by simultaneously me and the king. And obviously we're using the word the king here. Yes, on a certain level it works because kings have very significant robes, but it's a much deeper point that when we're hugging, when there's this embrace, it's me and God. He's the king. And I'm hugging him and being hugged by him every time I learn Torah. Because really, as we've already learned and know, in learning Torah, I become one with God because my brain and the intellect of Torah become one. And within the intellect of Torah, that's God, as we learned way back, right? Chapter 2 of Tanya. Hu v'chachmaso echad. He and his wisdom are one. Hu amado yodehu yadua, which you also learned in chapter 4. He's the knowledge. He's the ability to know. He's the one who knows. It's all him. Doesn't work that way by us. It does work that way by him. I had actually a very interesting class today in teaching seniors and, being very honest forum, somehow getting to this idea of like, well, we can be spiritual, but why be religious? Who wants dogma? Who wants rules? And oh boy, I went on that for a long, long time. But really, all these ideas from Tanya of, is God just trying to put rules on us? Torah is our freedom. That's what it says. Engraved, cherus. When we received the Torah, we became free because our soul only wants God. And through the Torah and her commandments, we're free. The soul becomes one with God. So that's true in general. Every single commandment. And there's a special intensity of that relationship specifically through Torah. In other words, we learned last chapter, we just finished chapter 4, this thought from Ethics of the Fathers, actually this past Shabbos, chapter 2, where it says, Yafa shachas b'tshuva ma'asim tovim ba'olam hazeh mikol chayei olam haba. It's yafa, it's nicer. 1 hour of work in this world than a lifetime of reward in the world to come. He said, well, that's not very good reward. 1 hour of work is better than an infinite reward. No thanks for such reward. But Rabbi explained, here is Yafeh, here is the advantage, because here, uniquely here, only here, the Jew, soul and body, on planet Earth, doing a mitzvah or learning Torah, literally is one with God. And all the souls above, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, David, Shlomo, the greatest souls of all times, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Solomon, who you name it, they can't do it. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have been up there for over 3,000 years, and they can't experience what our soul is experiencing this second. So this is really this pivotal point that we, through service, Torah, and the commandments, through learning Torah and fulfilling the commandments, God and I become one. But what we're going to do in chapter 5 is say, but there's something extra special that only happens with Torah. Now, there are a number of chapters scattered throughout Tanya, or portions of chapters, that focus on how amazingly special Torah is. Everything is special. Mitzvah does not mean command, right? Tzivoy, gezerah. Mitzvah is tzafsa. It's a bond. Every time I fulfill a mitzvah, the commandment, I am bonding with God. I and God are one. And again, I'm one with the way that Abraham at this moment is not one and has not been one for over 3,000 years. Because I'm a soul in a body on planet Earth that can do mitzvahs and learn Torah as a soul in a body. So here, God and I could be one. And that's true for all of my service. But there's certain things that are only true for Torah. And as I'm saying, there's 3 major places in Tanya that really focus on how special Torah is. And this chapter is one of them. So hopefully it will be very practical. Because hopefully it will be like, wow, this is so cool. This is so amazing. I get all this when I learn Torah. I'm in. That is what this is all about. So let us start chapter 5. L'tosefes bir be'er heitev lashon tfisa she'amar Eliyahu leis machshava tfesa b'chulei. We want to understand even better, with a very good explanation, the precision of wording of Eliyahu meaning Elijah the prophet, that he said, and we have this passage from him that we read Friday afternoon before the afternoon mincha prayer, and he's talking about God. And one of the things he says about God is, Leis machshava tfesa b'chulei. No thought can grasp you. And the Rebbe says, I want to understand that word grasp. Now, this is an opening question. This is not an exposition on Elijah, or for that matter, on the statement. We want to understand the unique, special quality of Torah, but this is the intro, how we're getting into it. So what is unique? What is the point the Rebbe is questioning or noting in the statement of Eliyahu, of Elijah? What's he trying to say? No thought can grasp you. What he means is, no thought can understand you. Right. So why didn't he say that? Well, he did. No, he didn't. He didn't say no thought can understand you. He said no thought can grasp you. We don't grasp with our thoughts, right? Like here's me grasping, gripping, holding the pen. I can grasp, grip, hold a pen. That's not what my brain is doing. Yeah, I use the terminology if I'm being loose and casual. Oh, I get it. Meaning, oh, I understand it. But that's just casual slang language. What I mean when I say I get it, I mean I understand it. But Elijah would not be talking to God and about God with casual slang language. So why did he say grasp when he meant understand? So the Rebbe says, we gotta understand, what does this grasping have to do with the process of intellect? Why do we want to know this? Because, as I said in this chapter, we want to be ultra motivated and excited and feel like so empowered in learning Torah. So we want to understand what happens when we learn Torah. And what happens is a grasp. Meaning, in essence, Elijah is saying, no thought of mine can grasp you. No thought of any of ours can grasp you. But through Torah, I can. Through Torah, I grip you, I grasp you, I hold you. So the Rebbe says, so in intellect, when you're using your mind and you're understanding, you're getting a concept, some intellectual concept, well, one thing that's happening is your mind is grasping the concept. Right. You're surrounding it with your mind. Your mind contains within it this intellect. And that intellectual concept is grasped and gripped and surrounded and garbed within that intellect that's grasping it. And also, something else is happening. The intellect is within that concept at the time when he's grasping it and gripping it in his mind. The Rebbe here is saying a lot of words, and the word intellect in many different forms came up many times in this whole long sentence I just read you. So let me clarify it. And there's so many levels of explanation on this. I'll give some. I'm not giving all. There's, as I'm saying, much thought on these words because this is very unusually wordy, if I can use such an expression, for Tanya. The Alter Rebbe is very clear, and he says it. Tanya is not meant to be flowery. So if anything seems flowery, it's like, what's really going on here? Because that's not what Tanya is. So here there's a lot of words. What's the Rebbe saying? So if I unpack the words, I first just want to unpack and give you what the words are, and then I want to give some insight on why is the Rebbe saying it like this. So the Rebbe here said 3 sentences, 3 phrases, but the first 2 are just the same thing, just seemingly repeating it from 2 different angles, right? So the Rebbe said, the first point the Rebbe said was, when you are learning something, again, I'm putting it not exactly in the words of the Rebbe, but simpler words that we would use more to make sense for us. When I am learning something, what's going on in my brain? Well, there's a certain dynamic relationship between my brain and the thought I'm learning. Right now, we are learning. We're learning the most godly thing possible. We're learning Tanya. So what's going on in our brains? Note, we keep using the word brain. Later, we're going to speak about our soul vis-a-vis learning. Now we're talking about literally the intellect of our brain. So when I'm learning something, we are all right now learning Tanya. So 1, my intellect is gripping that concept. My intellect is around it. My intellect is holding it. This is being gripped by my mind. And then the Rebbe says the same thing in like the other end of the story. The intellect is being gripped by my mind, right? So the Rebbe said, my mind is gripping the intellect. The intellect is being gripped by my mind. And the third point, which you might say is really the second, at the same time as my mind is containing this thought, my mind is within the thought as well. So we really have 2 things going on here, though the way the Rebbe said it, it sounded like 3, and then you cross-check yourself and you're like, wait, what am I saying? I'm saying the same thing twice. Yeah, sort of we are. So we have my mind containing the thought, otherwise known as the thought being contained by my mind. And then we have my mind being within the thought. So the 2 themes here are my mind contains within it the thought, which I say in 2 ways, and the thought contains within it my mind. In other words, what the Rebbe is saying is there's a double embrace going on, right? The end of last chapter, we said, you hug the king and the king hugs you. Why'd the Rebbe have to say, and the king hugs you? We're hugging the king. That's the point. That was our question. When I learn Torah, is God really in there? And we said, yes, he is, right? Remember the princess and the pea. Many layers, but under that's the pea. Many layers. And within that is God himself. I am hugging the king. But the Rebbe added, again, unnecessary words, and the king is hugging you. And that's the point that the Rebbe is now decoding. Specifically, uniquely, when we learn Torah, there's a double embrace. And we're talking about the double embrace, my intellect and the intellect of Torah. Of course, the intellect of Torah is God, because he and his wisdom are one. Hu v'chachmasu echad, hu amado yodehu yadua, as Maimonides said. He's the knowledge, he's the knower, he's the ability to know. So my mind and the mind of Torah are one, which means my mind and God within that mind of Torah, because he is that mind of Torah, are one. And we're one so completely that it's not something we can give any parable that really works in this world. Because generally, we contain something or are contained by something, right? So if I had something small enough, which I don't at the moment, but I'll rip something up to demonstrate the point. Okay. Now this is fulfilling its godly purpose. This would have just gone in the garbage, but now this is helping us learn Tanya. This is a thing. And I'm completely holding it. I'm not held by it. I'm holding it. At the same time, I am held by the room I'm in. I'm contained within the room. So I am holding the paper. I am held by, contained within, encompassed, encircled, engarbed by the room. But it's not a double embrace because I'm not holding the room in me and the paper is not containing me. I'm containing the paper. If you would think literally of two people giving a hug, well, that's a double embrace. It's an embrace, but it's not an encasement because the Rebbe went on and gave, as I said, many words, engarbed, encompassed. Like this is not only a hug like this. This is like this, but it's happening on both levels. As if we could imagine I'm holding, and at the same time, this is completely holding me. And that only works when our minds are holding and being held by God's thoughts, Torah. Because it doesn't work in our physical world. You are held by or you are holding. But with that embrace between me and God through Torah, both are happening simultaneously. So first the Rebbe said, on two levels, my mind contains within it the thought, and the thought is contained within my mind. And then the Rebbe said, and at the same time, my mind is within the Torah. My mind is I am holding the thought in my mind, and the thought is containing me. So the Rebbe asks, on these words of the Alter Rebbe, why does he say it twice? And it goes into many, many, many ideas. And I'm saying there's so much explanation and exposition on this little piece of Tanya because it's not clear what is the point the Alter Rebbe is doing here. And I'm going to give you some ideas of the Rebbe, and there are many, many ideas, other explanations that I'm not giving you because I'm saying you could just talk and talk and talk about these ideas. But the Rebbe said, like on one level, it could be, so to speak, that the Alter Rebbe wrote it this way because it's such an incredible point. In other words, it's purely for emphasis. Like we have sometimes in Navi, where we say, why is this repeated? Why is these words repeated? To emphasize, this is important. We're saying it several ways. So the Alter Rebbe, who's so, I wouldn't say concise, I would say careful, meticulous, planned out in every word, and as we know, every letter of Tanya. Remember, 6 weeks on one vav, which means and, one letter. He wrote this double. The mind contains the thought, and otherwise known as the thought is contained within the mind. You're saying the same thing twice. I want you to emphasize this point. I want you to get it. This is unbelievable because the thought we're talking about is God's thought. It's Torah. It's God himself. He and his wisdom are one. So I want you to really stop and pause and say, what? What is the Alter Rebbe doing here? Oh, wow. Right now, when I'm learning Torah, God's thoughts, God himself is within my brain. We're not saying the energy of God is within your soul. We'll talk about your soul. We will. Deeply. But we're talking about your very brain. Your very human brain contains within it Torah, which is the thoughts of God, which is God himself. Like, pause and think about that. That's unbelievable. That's one idea the Rebbe says here. Another idea the Rebbe says is, and this is, again, going along the lines of it's repeated because it's so unbelievable. Not only in general is it unbelievable, as I just explained, but the Rebbe says there's no qualification here, or there's no discrimination here. There's no bar here. Meaning even someone who's learning Torah inappropriately, this still happens. Even someone that we would say better he shouldn't learn Torah. Even someone who's evil and learning Torah for evil reasons, this is still happening. meaning this is embedded in the process of learning Torah, that you contain the Torah, which is the thoughts of God, which is God in your brain. And this happens to every single person, no matter how unworthy they might be, and no matter how wrong it might be what they're doing. So that's a very, very, very powerful thought, that even people that Torah is saying shouldn't be learning Torah, but guess what? They're still holding God in their thoughts. This is such a gift God gives us, that you should just, like, even at this point, and we're going to say a lot more over the chapter, but at this point, just like stop, breathe, and be like, wow, I'm so clueless. As we've said many times since we began Tanya, we're only in chapter 5, when we learn Torah, there's a lot of great things that happen. One is I gain a lot of amazing knowledge, and it inspires me, and it teaches me how to live as a Jew, and many other wonderful things. And the Rebbe says, that's great. That's not the core. The core is you and God are one. You are containing God's thoughts in your brain. This is what's happening when you learn Torah. And this point, the oneness of you and God, God's thoughts literally being held by your brain, that's the core to focus on when you're learning Torah. If you remember, we learned it in Tanya right around Shavuos, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is what we're supposed to think by Shavuos, that every time we learn Torah, it's like, God, I want to give you a hug. How do I give God a hug? Learn. I'm giving a hug. And now we understand more deeply than we did a few weeks ago what that hug means. So the Rebbe says it's doubled because it's unbelievable. And it's doubled because it's unbelievable that even a person who so doesn't deserve it and is so learning Torah for the wrong reasons, even for him, this happens. Now, this idea, again, my mind is containing the thought. Well, that makes sense, right? Because when you learn something, that thing you learn, hopefully, you grasped it, you understood it, it's now part of your brain matter. It's within your brain. It happens to be here. It's incredibly special because we're talking not about a intellectual concept. We're talking about God's thoughts. But the Rebbe then added something that we wouldn't think of as normally happening, which is, and the thought contains you. The thought is within you, right? Because I'm learning, I'm processing. This thought has now become part of the arena and the arsenal of my brain. And at the same time, I can't do it with my hands, but at the same time, your mind is within the thought, which is understood in many, many ways. And again, just following along how the Rebbe explains it in one of the ways, the Rebbe says, that thought's gripping you. When you learn Torah, that thought is gripping you. You're gripping it because you're understanding it and you're containing it in your brain, but it's gripping you. Why is it gripping me like that? So the Rebbe said, because initially, when you learn something, it grips you because you're like thinking about it and trying to understand it. And you're like within it. Obviously, some things we learn are very simple and it's not that type of experience. But if you're learning something that's really stretching your mind, intriguing your mind, really pulling at your brain, like you keep thinking about it. And as you're learning, you can't have something else in your brain, right? We try to like multitask, maybe especially for people that are learning on Zoom. In general, you're at a shir and you're also saying Tehillim, and then you realize some things that you should have added to your shopping list at the same time. We try to multitask, which means we're not doing anything too well. When you're learning, it should be such an all-encompassing experience. I won't ask anyone what this is like now, but it should be such an all-encompassing experience that it's gripping your brain. Your brain is within the thought. You can't be making your shopping list. You can't be doing something else. Again, maybe you do something mindless, but you're doodling or you're washing dishes mindlessly. But your mind, the only thing that could be going on in your mind is this thought because it's gripping your brain. But the Rebbe said it doesn't stop there because this thought is Torah, is God's thoughts, is God's will and wisdom. And that's far more vast, far huger than the human brain, which means if we could maybe say that if I'm learning something very intellectually intriguing of a science, and I'm really thinking and thinking and thinking about it, but then at a certain point, okay, I got it, and move on. It's no longer gripping me. It's in my brain, but it's no longer gripping me. But the Rebbe says that never happens with Torah, because you never come to the point of like, oh, I got it, because it's Torah. It's God's thoughts. So a piece of God's thoughts is always going to be bigger than your understanding and bigger than your brain. So on one hand, as I'm learning this, like right now, we are learning the dynamics of how we learn Torah and what's going on in our brain. So I'm learning it and I'm thinking about it and I'm containing it in my thoughts, because this has now become part of my intellectual arsenal, the material of my thoughts. And simultaneously, I'm like, what? Whoa, what's going on? And I'm like thinking about this and it's holding me. And then it still keeps holding me, because there's a piece of it that's always going to be beyond my intellect. Because what's my intellectual capacity to God's thoughts? So that piece that will always be beyond my brain is like always gripping me. So we're saying here, on one level, it's always gripping you because it's too big to get into your brain. And it's on another level, it's gripping you because you're still on a certain level trying to figure it out. Like a piece of your brain is still processing and you're learning something else, but it's still processing. It's still processing because this is God's will and wisdom. So you can't 100% get it, even though God made all those layers for us to a certain degree. So again, just to wrap up what we've said here, when I learn, I am containing the thought of God in me, which is so important and so amazing and such an innovative, unbelievable gift that the Torah says it twice, so to speak. And additionally, the double embrace, which is unbelievable and can never happen in the physical world except in this, because nothing completely surrounds and is surrounded simultaneously, happens when I'm learning. I'm containing the thought and I'm contained by the thought. Now, if you would think of those two ideas, so the thought is Torah, which is God's will and wisdom, which is God himself. What is more special, to use that term? What's more impactful? What's more significant? That my mind contains Torah, or that Torah contains my mind? Any thoughts on that? What would your vote be?
I would think that Torah contains my mind. Because
okay,
to be honest with you, because I learn and learn and learn, and then if I want to give it over like you, it's in my mind, but I just don't know how to bring it out, to make people understand, I guess. So that's why.
Okay, so you're saying how much you're containing the Torah you don't know, but it's really reassuring to know the Torah is containing you.
Exactly.
Got it. Anyone else? Any thoughts on that? Which do you think makes more of an impact? That I contain the Torah inside of me, inside of my brain contains the Torah, or that my brain is contained within the Torah? They're both amazing. We're not saying, yeah, that's chopped liver. No, they're both amazing, and they're both happening simultaneously. But any thoughts on which is even more effective on us?
Well, I'm just thinking the idea of Torah being in me makes me Torah.
Right.
And
that's why you're correct. Meaning, as Turen got it, this is like, on one end, I totally understand what Rachel's saying. And they're both very cool, amazing ideas. That my mind became part of the mind of Torah is unbelievable. But the inner impact, what's even more impactful on me, though both are impactful on me and both are amazing and both are gifts from God, because it didn't have to be this way. We could just be learning Torah to know what to do, right? That's why many people learn Torah. We could be learning Torah to rack up reward. That's why many people learn Torah. We're learning Torah to be to such a degree one with God that my mind and his mind, so to speak, have this interwoven embrace. So They're both unbelievable. That my mind is part of the thought of Torah is unbelievable. But in terms of the impact that Torah comes within my mind, that's transformative. That's a very, very, very inner change, inner shift that my wiring now, my brain's neurological paths are Torah. That's the unbelievable gift that's happening when we learn Torah. So the Rebbe goes on to say, like making sure we understood after all the words. So, derech mashal, for example, if a person is understanding, he's grasping a law in Torah, the Mishnah or B'Gemara, as it's recorded in the Mishnah or in the Talmud, La Shura al Boreha, very, very well. Now, of course, the Rebbe is saying here, for all this amazing happening, you got to really be learning. Like a lot of times by me, it's not real learning. It's reading. I mean, I must have read and translated because somehow I got to the end. But like Rachel was saying, don't ask me any questions. Or maybe more than she was saying. It's like, don't ask me any questions because like, I must have like sort of with davening, right? You're like, whoa, how did I get to Elena so fast? I mean, I must have said every word. I turned the pages. I know how to daven, but I don't really have any memory of it. So I just learned this. I mean, I guess I got to the end of it, but I don't know. I said my chitas. I said the words. I don't know what I was saying. No, that's not what we're talking about here. This is an intellectual processing. And for this intellectual processing to happen, your mind truly has to be within it, right? For it to be in your mind and your mind to be in it, you have to truly intellectually be focused and be understanding. Because if you don't understand, you can be very sincere, but the double embrace isn't happening. This is literally intellectual. Your mind is containing God's thoughts. Unbelievable. So your mind has to really be getting it. The Rebbe says very foundationally, Ashura al Boreha, which means really, really foundationally understanding it. And then this happens. Your intellect is grasping, is gripping, is surrounding this concept. And at the same time, and at the same time, your mind is within the concept. I gave you a few ideas. I gave you a few explanations. Far more than I gave you is what I didn't give you, because there's many, many levels of understanding the words of the Alter Rebbe here. We're going to go on, but I just don't want to shortchange you and think, oh, now you know it all. We don't. But we gave over some ideas. Now, what is this halacha, right? The example the Rebbe gave. For example, if you learn a law from the Mishnah or the Talmud, well, this law is God's will and wisdom. I just want to stop to say, because there's a concept that comes up many times in Tanya, so I'm interrupting my reading to interrupt and say this. Why does the Rebbe say halacha here? Is not the same true with a pasuk chumash? Is not the same true with words of Chassidus of Tanya? If I'm learning a midrash, yes. In general, this happens whenever you learn Torah. Real Torah. I don't mean like people's personal inspirations on Torah, but real Torah, it happens. Your mind is containing the Torah, God's will and wisdom, and the Torah is containing you. But the Rebbe is focusing here on halacha, and the Rebbe does this many, many, many times in Tanya. Throughout Tanya, we keep coming back to this point, because halacha has a special edge over everything else. And I always feel nothing inspires you to learn halacha more than Chassidus, which is sort of interesting because you think, oh, there's a world of halacha, like knowing the laws. Oh, there's a world of Chassidus, being spiritual, the inner dimension. Well, the more you learn Chassidus, the more you should be inspired to learn halacha. Because halacha uniquely has a very special relationship, as is obvious, to God's will. All of Torah is God's will and wisdom. Any verse in Chumash, in Tanakh, in a midrash, it's all God's will and wisdom. But halacha is overtly, clearly, we see the will of God. I want this, and I don't want that. And you have to do it like this with this precision. And that's what I want. Halacha is almost like God's emotions. Halacha is in the world of Yitzhira, in the world of emotion. Halacha is God's emotions. This is what I like, and this is what I do not like and don't want. So the Rebbe here, again, could have said any part of Torah, but specifically is focusing on halacha because of its forte of even more strongly than anything else, connecting us absolutely to not only the wisdom, but what's within and deeper than the wisdom, the very will of God. Meaning will transcends wisdom. Will is higher than wisdom. All Torah is God's will and wisdom, but with most Torah, what's obvious to us is the wisdom. And the will is within that, very covert. With halacha, the will is overt. So I'm connecting on a revealed plane, not just to wisdom, which is amazing and not a just, but also directly to will, which is even higher. Okay, so getting back to what we're saying. This law is God's will and wisdom. It came up in the will of God. That if Reuven tainas, he litigates like this, like so-and-so, in, so to speak, and then Shimon argues against him and says like this and like this, the law, the verdict, the halacha will be like this and this. And even if this thing never happened, right? There's a whole discussion in the Gemara. Did a ben Sorah Umorah ever happen? Right? Ben Sorah Umorah is such a unique situation. Not just unique because what parent would do this to their child, but unique because there's so many laws. He's got to be, I think, from 13 to 13 and a half. And if he's younger than 13 or older than 13 and a half, no. And the whole process has to happen in those 6 months. And I could be wrong, could be even shorter than 6 months. And he has to eat a certain amount of meat and has to be raw and with bad company and then using up all his father's money and stealing money. There's so many things that have to happen. Parents have to be the same height. Like, I mean, so many details. Could this ever have happened? And there's voices in the Talmud that say, no way. And then, of course, there's someone in the Talmud that says, I slept by the grave of a ben Sorah Umorah. So, but what's the point in learning something that never happened, or many laws in our existence, laws of purity and impurity, laws having to do with the temple, laws having to do with offerings. If we go through the cycle of studying Maimonides, like the Rebbe has been encouraging for many, many years, a lot of those laws, on the practical basis, have about zero relevance to our current lives. So what do we study them for? Chassidus is supposed to inspire me and bring me closer to God. Chassidus refines me. Chassidus makes me godly. Chassidus makes me pure and unleashes my soul. But halacha is to know what to do. So if it has no relevance in my life, obviously, I don't learn it. Alter Rebbe says, no, not at all. Because this specific halacha, the Alter Rebbe just said, this never was and this never will be. To have this exact litigation, Reuven says exactly like this, and Shimon exactly like this, and the law is exactly like this, never was or never will be. Mikol makom, nevertheless, because this came up in God's will and wisdom, that if one would say like this and one would say like this, the verdict would be like this. When a person knows this law, this verdict, he knows it. As it's laid out in the Mishnah, or more elaboration in the Talmud, or in later sages, the Poskim, you're grasping in your mind the will and wisdom of God. No thought can grasp him, right? That's how we opened up this chapter. Can't grasp him. You can't grasp his will. You can't grasp his wisdom. Will and wisdom and him are all one. Ki'im. Only, exclusively, in this engarment, when they're engarbed in the laws that are laid out before us. The Rebbe is saying here very, very extensively. I just said a lot of words on a very basic concept, meaning something you probably all understood within the first few minutes of it. But the Alter Rebbe really wants you to get this. He's saying this very, very strongly, very clearly. He wants it to be so inlaid in your brain that learn halacha even if it has no practical relevance. Why am I learning halacha that has no practical relevance? Let me learn Chumash. Let me learn Chassidus. Why am I learning halacha, law that's not relating to my life? It's not litigating me. What am I learning it for? Because there's a piece of God's will and wisdom in every single law. And if you don't learn that law, you will never be able to connect to that part of God. If you could imagine a friend, a good friend, a spouse, and you want to know them, you want to understand them. And when they're sharing parts of themselves that you never heard, it fascinates you. You're so excited to learn this part of them, to these experiences. Your parent, if your father or mother is sharing with you parts of their life they never shared before, it's so meaningful to you because you want them, you love them, and you want to understand their totality. And oh, that's why they behave like this. That's why they have this reaction. Oh. So just so you can imagine with a close friend, with a spouse, with a child, with a parent, this is us and God. And every halacha contains a bit of him, a specific, unique piece of his will and wisdom. So if I say, well, all those laws are not relevant, I'm saying if you would like think of those 14 volumes of Maimonides, which are in a sense encapsulating all law, a tremendously high percentage of those 14 volumes are not relevant to me today in the 21st century American life. The Rebbe wants us to learn it all. We're supposed to learn it all because every halacha is giving me another grip on God, another understanding of God himself. He's sharing himself with me. Like you can think of someone sharing, like giving over personal experiences, what they've been through in life, stories, vignettes of their past. God's sharing what he really cares about, embedded in each halacha. Now, obviously, this is not only true for halacha. This is true for all Torah. All Torah is God's will and wisdom. Every aspect of Torah is containing a piece of God that's only contained in that aspect. And I only get that aspect of him when I learn that piece of Torah. But for all other parts of Torah, we're not expecting it to be a practical need-driven study. I'm learning Chumash, I'm learning Megillah, I'm learning Hasidus. I understand it's affecting me spiritually, but halacha is telling me what to do. There says, no, same point. Halacha is containing God. And actually, as we said, deeper point, because by halacha, you're even more clearly, overtly getting what's even higher than his wisdom. You're getting his will. So that's why the Rebbe is very much emphasizing this, because it's so, for many people, you call it counterintuitive or what they would never do. And I really feel if you think about this, you want to incorporate in your life studying halacha. Now, you could study halachas that you need to know. It's not a problem, but just understanding how precious is every halacha, because each one is containing a piece of God that I can only get through this halacha. And as the Rebbe says, it will never be practically relevant. That's another situation. That's another story. That's another layer. We're going to the core. And the core isn't practically relevant. The core is you and God being one on this specific nuance of him, of his will and his wisdom.